Daniel Hayes stared at the blank walls of his apartment, the silence pressing in like a weight he couldn't shake. The divorce papers lay on the kitchen table, neatly stacked but heavy with finality. He traced the edges with his fingers, thinking about the years he had given to a marriage that had quietly crumbled while he was busy living in someone else's shadow. Mark's absence in their last months had been almost total, filled with late nights at the office and weekend getaways that Daniel hadn't been invited to. Now, the apartment felt too big, too empty, and he felt smaller than he had in years. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed without a twinge of guilt or tension. He had never been impulsive. But on a Thursday morning, he found himself booking a last-minute trip to Pacific Northwest. He told himself it was about scenery, fresh air, and escaping the memories of a life that no longer existed. He needed to see cliffs, forests, and oceans, anything that could make him feel like he could breathe again. The town he chose was small, known for its hiking trails and quiet beaches, somewhere far enough that nobody would recognize him, far enough that even his own reflection wouldn't remind him of a past life he was ready to forget, even if his heart hadn't fully caught up. By the time he arrived, the overcast sky and the crisp scent of the sea already felt like a relief. The town was sleepy, quiet in a way that allowed him to think without distraction. The streets were lined with quaint shops and cafes, each one promising simplicity. He checked into a small inn overlooking the cliffs and stepped onto the balcony to let the wind carry some of the heaviness he had been holding for months. It didn't vanish, but it moved slightly, and that felt like a start. As he watched gulls circle above the gray water, he allowed himself a small, reluctant smile. Maybe he could heal here. The next morning, he wandered down to the inn's lobby, intending to sign up for a guided hike, hoping the physical activity would give him some mental clarity. That's when he met Ethan Miller. Ethan's warm smile was easy, unforced, and his presence immediately put Daniel slightly off balance. Ethan had the kind of calm confidence that wasn't showy but quietly magnetic. He offered Daniel a handshake and a welcoming remark about how brave it was to explore alone. Daniel, caught off guard by both the friendliness and the effortless charm, stammered a response that felt awkward even to him. Ethan laughed lightly, the kind of sound that seemed to smooth out some of the tension Daniel hadn't realized he was carrying. The hike began slowly, with Ethan pointing out local flora and sharing stories about the cliffs, the tides, and the small-town history. Daniel listened more than he spoke, but that didn't stop his attention from slipping toward Ethan more often than he wanted. There was a steady rhythm to Ethan's speech, a warmth that invited trust without demanding it. Daniel reminded himself repeatedly that he wasn't here to meet anyone, that his heart was still entangled in the mess of his marriage. And yet, something in Ethan's quiet attentiveness made Daniel feel noticed, seen in a way that Mark never had been in the last years of their relationship. As the day went on, Daniel felt an unfamiliar ease. They climbed to an overlook, the ocean stretching endlessly below, and Ethan paused, giving Daniel space to take it in. He didn't push conversation, but simply shared a few small observations about the beauty of the cliffs. Daniel caught himself comparing the experience to the emotional emptiness he had left behind. He felt a pang of guilt, a whisper in his mind telling him he shouldn't feel connected to someone so soon, but the pull of comfort and genuine attention was undeniable. By the end of the hike, Ethan suggested a follow-up walk the next morning. Daniel hesitated for only a moment before agreeing, almost surprised at how quickly he said yes. It wasn't physical attraction, not yet, but something subtler, an emotional recognition that he hadn't allowed himself in years. As they parted for the evening, Daniel realized he was thinking about Ethan more than he expected. His mind replaying their shared laughter, the sound of Ethan's voice, and the simple kindness in his eyes. He felt both excitement and guilt, the strange combination of opening a new chapter while still holding the old one close. For the first time in months, he wondered if escape could also be the start of something healing. The next morning, Daniel woke earlier than he had in months, the thought of meeting Ethan again stirring an excitement he didn't quite recognize. He dressed quickly, the crisp air outside reminding him how far he had come just by being here, in a place that felt unclaimed by his past. At the trailhead, Ethan was already waiting, leaning casually against his backpack, a small grin lighting up his face. "Morning, early bird," Ethan said, voice warm and teasing. Daniel forced a laugh, Feeling the tension in his chest ease slightly. There was simplicity to Ethan's presence, a lack of pretense, that made Daniel feel strangely at home despite the distance from everything he knew. As they started walking, Ethan pointed out the way the sunlight hit certain rocks and the patterns of the tide below. Daniel listened, occasionally offering observations, but mostly absorbing the steady rhythm of Ethan's words. They spoke of small things, favorite books, local cuisine, the best hidden cafes. But even in the lightness of conversation, Daniel felt the weight of his own story pressing beneath the surface. He hadn't intended to share anything so personal, yet Ethan's openness invited honesty without forcing it. There was a patience to Ethan that made Daniel feel safe, a sense that he could reveal himself at his own pace. Halfway along the trail, Ethan glanced at Daniel and said gently, "You seem like someone who carries a lot with them. You don't have to talk about it, but I can tell there's history there." Daniel paused, taken aback by how accurately Ethan had read him. He wanted to deflect, to brush it off with a joke, but the words felt like a key unlocking memories he had been trying to lock away. He found himself telling Ethan a condensed version of his marriage, the quiet drift of love that had left him feeling invisible. Ethan listened without interruption, his eyes attentive, encouraging, but never pressing. Daniel was surprised at how much it relieved him just to speak aloud, to give his past a shape outside his own mind. The trail opened to a cliffside overlook, the ocean stretching endlessly beyond, waves crashing softly against jagged rocks. Daniel leaned against the railing, letting the wind whip against his face. Ethan stood beside him, not too close, not too far, a presence that felt steady and grounding. Daniel's voice was quieter here, almost lost in the sound of the wind, as he admitted, "I don't know how to be myself anymore. It's like I forgot who I am outside of that marriage." Ethan's response was calm and patient. "Maybe you just need someone to remind you. You deserve to feel seen, Daniel. You deserve to be cared for." Daniel felt a tightness in his chest, a mixture of relief and guilt. He was drawn to Ethan in ways he hadn't expected, comparing this warmth to the cold distance of his last years with Mark. This realization unsettled him. He hadn't planned to feel anything new so soon, yet the pull of connection was undeniable. He watched Ethan gesture toward the horizon, telling stories about the lighthouse in the distance and the town's history of shipwrecks, and felt a strange comfort in the distraction. Ethan's voice had a rhythm that soothed the anxiety he hadn't admitted to himself he was carrying. They sat together on a large boulder, sharing a water bottle, their conversation slowing into comfortable silence. Daniel realized that he was laughing more freely than he had in months, the tension in his shoulders easing. The emotional shift he felt was powerful, tinged with both excitement and guilt. He was developing feelings for someone new while still holding the memory of Mark in his mind. Ethan noticed a subtle hesitation, the brief flickers of uncertainty in Daniel's eyes, but never commented on it directly. Instead, he smiled gently and said, "There's another spot I'd like to show you tomorrow, if you want to come." Daniel felt a quick surge of anticipation and replied almost instinctively, "I'd like that." As they descended the trail, Daniel's thoughts were a mixture of guilt and wonder. He was comparing Ethan's attentiveness and warmth to the emotional neglect he had endured in his marriage. It was an internal conflict he wasn't prepared for, feeling drawn to someone new so soon, yet recognizing that this connection was different, safe, and healing rather than destructive. Ethan's presence had opened something inside him that had long been dormant, the possibility of trust, companionship, and genuine care. By the time they reached the trailhead, the day had softened into a hazy afternoon. Daniel thanked Ethan for guiding him, his voice unsteady with unfamiliar gratitude. Ethan waved him off with casual ease, saying, "It's no problem. You made the hike enjoyable, too." But Daniel knew it was more than that. The day had shifted something inside him. As he walked back to the inn, he reflected on the unexpected pull he felt toward Ethan, a subtle emotional bond that was forming, delicate yet undeniable. For the first time since his divorce, Daniel allowed himself to imagine a future where he could feel truly alive again, and it both thrilled and frightened him. That evening, Daniel replayed the day in his mind. Every gesture, every glance, every laugh shared with Ethan lingered like a spark he couldn't ignore. He knew this wasn't about rushing into something physical, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for romance, but the emotional intimacy was powerful enough to shake him from his numbness. As he closed his eyes, he felt the faintest hint of hope creeping in, a recognition that even after heartbreak, connection was still possible, and that someone like Ethan could help him see it again. That evening, Daniel decided to take a quiet walk along the boardwalk by the water before dinner. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and purple, and the town's small lamps reflected on the gently rippling waves. It was peaceful, almost magical, and Daniel felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in years. When he rounded the corner, he saw Ethan already walking along the railing, hands in his pockets, seemingly waiting for him. Ethan looked up and gave a small, welcoming smile that made Daniel's chest tighten slightly, not with desire, but with the warmth of recognition and connection. "Hey," Ethan said, his voice carrying over the soft murmur of the water. "I thought you might like this view." Daniel nodded, unable to hide the subtle excitement in his expression. There was something grounding about Ethan's presence. He didn't rush, didn't pressure, and yet just being near him made Daniel feel lighter, as if a weight he hadn't fully acknowledged was slowly lifting. They walked side by side, the rhythm of their steps matching the ebb of the tide below. Conversation came easily, filled with shared laughter and quiet observations. Ethan pointed out a small cafe tucked away at the end of the boardwalk, its windows glowing warmly in the twilight. "I thought we could grab a coffee there. It's quiet, and the owner makes the best chocolate croissants in town." Daniel felt a soft thrill at the idea, not because of the food, but because it was a chance to spend more time with someone who seemed to understand him without question. They stepped inside, the aroma of fresh coffee and baked goods wrapping around them like a comforting blanket. The conversation drifted to small personal details, favorite childhood memories, the simple joys of daily life, and little dreams for the future. Daniel found himself laughing freely, something he hadn't done since the divorce became official. The tension that had weighed on him for months was dissolving in the presence of Ethan's calm attentiveness. Yet, amid the lightness, there was a shadow of guilt. He couldn't stop thinking about Mark, about the life he had left behind, and about how quickly he was forming an emotional bond with someone new. He glanced at Ethan, noticing the patient and gentle gaze, and realized that the conflict in his chest wasn't about betrayal. It was about learning to trust himself again. After coffee, they walked to a dock that extended into the water, the boards creaking softly under their feet. Ethan sat down on the edge, legs dangling over the side, and gestured for Daniel to join him. They sat in companionable silence for a few moments, watching the waves catch the last light of day. Daniel finally spoke, his voice low and reflective. "You've made me realize something I didn't know I was missing, that I deserve to be seen, that I can feel again without shame." Ethan looked at him, a gentle smile touching his lips. "It's true. You've carried a lot for too long. It's okay to let yourself feel something new. You deserve it." Daniel felt a warmth spread through him, not of passion, but of trust and hope. He realized he wasn't betraying his past. He was acknowledging that he could still experience connection and care. The emotional weight of his divorce was still there, but it no longer defined him. He had permission, finally, to step into the possibility of joy again. Ethan's quiet presence had shown him that being drawn to someone new was not a lapse of morality. It was a return to himself. As twilight deepened, they stood and slowly walked back toward the inn. Daniel realized he wanted to extend his stay, not just for the scenic cliffs or the quiet town, but for the companionship and understanding he had found with Ethan. He felt anticipation without anxiety, hope without pressure. When they reached the inn, Ethan paused, looking at him with that same soft, encouraging gaze. "I'd like for you to stay a little longer. I enjoy spending time with you," he said. Daniel smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "I like that a lot." The evening ended quietly, with no rush, no expectation, only the calm understanding that connection and healing were possible. Daniel entered his room and allowed himself to sit on the bed, reflecting on the journey he had taken. Not just across miles, but through the landscape of his own heart. He had escaped the past, yes, but had also found a doorway to something new. Trust, companionship, and the gentle promise of love that might grow, slowly and carefully, in its own time. He closed his eyes that night with a sense of peace, realizing that the cliffs, the ocean, and the small town had given him more than a temporary escape. They had given him a chance to rediscover himself, to embrace the possibility of connection, and step into the next chapter of his life with hope instead of fear.